Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Maloney, and I'm the co-founder and national convener of AELA, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we have another rather wonderful creative conversation. Before I introduce our lovely speakers, I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the very beautiful lands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Jinnaburra peoples. I now live in Narangba up in southeast Queensland. And I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, emerging young leaders, and acknowledge that land was never ceded, that the first peoples of this nation always have and always will be the custodians and carers of their traditional estates scattered across this continent like a beautiful patchwork quilt. Today, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA, is delighted to host another creative conversation. Many years ago, we were lucky enough to connect with a number of amazing artists and start creating a small but mighty Earth Arts Collective. Jude and Helen have been part of a number of AELA art exhibitions and other projects and initiatives over the years. And we love to continue watching their work and seeing what they get up to. So we've invited Helen and Jude to come and share with us some of the remarkable work they're doing out along the Maranoa. And I'm hoping they'll also promote a rather fantastic event they're hosting in Brisbane in a week or two. But first, I'm going to share screen and get Jude's slides up. Please bear with us. We've had a couple of technical issues, but hopefully all will be well.
Okay. Look, I want to acknowledge the Turrbal people from Yanjin here in Brisbane and the Gungri people on the land and waters where the arts project is situated as the traditional custodians, and paying my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Thanks, Michelle and the AELA team, for supporting our project and giving Helen and I this opportunity today to present this. I'll start by putting the project into context with its location and the development of the collective, and talking about what we've been doing recently, and then Helen will share her recent workings. What I show you is the only a tenth of what the collective has achieved. Remapping Mitchell is an immersive arts project developed by the Gungri, Maranoa and visiting artists on country. So we meet and create on various sites of the Maranoa watershed, which contributes to a continuously growing archive. The immersive camps follow the roots of surveyor Sir Thomas Mitchell in 1846, and these sites are significant to the Gungri and other neighbouring nations. It's a community-based arts collective and has grown out of long and ongoing creative relationships between the facilitating artists and the Maranoa region since 2018. It encompasses camps and workshops, large-scale projection events, and soon local exhibitions. The ongoing projects are initiated through traditional custodians, Dr Vicky Saunders and Vanessa Feen, alongside myself, having lived in the Maranoa for 21 years. Past camps have been facilitated too by Sareva Mitchell and mentored by Auntie Lynette Nixon. So the title of this part of the webinar is Shining a Light on the Luminous, which is that first slide. Phosphorescence is a process in which energy absorbed by a substance is released relatively slowly in the form of light. This could very well describe the processes of the collective and the river environments which gradually reveal or acknowledge layers of place by circulatory processes. This is achieved by listening, exchanging, restoring, reimagining, learning, creating, and healing. So the group's aim is to shine a light on the luminous, sometimes without knowing what the luminous is, until it may disclose itself. So next slide. Thanks, Michelle. So the uniqueness of the Maranoa River is that it is part of the recharge area of the Great Artesian Basin and headwaters of the Murray-Darling Basin. On the screen, you might see a little dot in the red area, and that's the headwaters of the Maranoa. Water from the discharge can be up to 800,000 years old when it travels at minuscule distance each year. So the next slide, where the satellite imagery is, shows the east and west branches of the Maranoa River, which encompasses 5 major catchments. Gungari elder Auntie Lynette Nixon says her father told her Marda the hand signifies the river. Many stencils of the hand are found at certain cultural sites in the Mount Moffat section of Convenor National Park, which holds multiple culturally significant sites for the Gungari, Bidjara and neighbouring nations. The next slide with the images of the river coming down. My personal journey to the Maranoa is that I moved from Sydney to live in the Burringa Shire in 1984 when I married Harry, and I lived there for 21 years until we moved to Brisbane. I've always loved the bush and grew up in the bush environments of in Sydney. I developed a romantic idea of the bush through viewing the early colonial landscape prints that we had on our suburban lounge room wall, but this soon was replaced with the reality of living inland. And like many Australian people of my generation, I knew little about Aboriginal Australia. But while living there, I loved watching our children playing on the creek and riverbeds, which gave them a sense of freedom. We left the property in 2005, and I knew there would be 2 things I'd miss. The fact that you were sometimes the only person within a vast distance, and also the mesmerising night skies. So these images show the river coming down, which come down in different ways. My father-in-law told me once about a time when it came down like a tidal wave. And last year, when I was drawing on the river, the riverbed, waiting for it to come down, and an echidna and a turtle came walking past, and they both sensed the imminent flow and proceeded to walk straight up the bank, which was quite a funny thing to see. This next slide is our first project of the collective in 2018. I'll just quote from Remapping Mitchell, who described the event. We have named this project Nyalama Nyalinda in Gungari language, which means because of her we can. Land stands at the heart of everything. It is the foundation of our culture. From the land comes identity, culture, dreaming, sacred sites and language. Remapping Mitchell, with Auntie Lynette Nixon and as cultural mentor, and myself, we facilitated the 3-day arts immersion on the river at the confluence of 3 water sources and spiritual place for Gungari peoples. So we had over 20 visiting local and Indigenous artists, sharing conversations with elders, knowledge holders and local community, scientists and others about the Maranoa and the surrounds, while creating and filming and writing on the unique watershed. It was held in memory of Auntie Irene Ryder, who was pivotal leader of reconciliation and an activist for the Gungari people. So for artists like myself, this experience made for a deeper understanding of the complexity of the river holds. So the next slide is when we just had, after the camp, we had a pop-up show at the local Mitchell Shire Hall. The next slide. Part of the immersion camps is to walk through country. So the first image was when Warren Saunders took us for a walk. That was in 2018, and there you'll see Greg Harms recording and documenting the moment. The second image was just recently at Mount Moffat, when Remapping Mitchell show was pointing out various plants and showing us their cultural significance and that interconnectedness of the plants to the landforms. So the residencies are based on participatory and collaborative sessions. Although certain aspects are planned, many of these events happened organically, which I'll show you in the next slide. So here we all are on the camp, around the campfire. Vicky Saunders facilitated a creative listening session to engage with sonic agency. It's about responding and exchanging in a circulatory method. Everyone has different journeys, but being on the river seems to dissolve that. At least that's what I felt in Vicky's session. That second image is Helen passing around the earphones around to listen to the underwater sounds that she was recording in the river. The next slide showing, so after the lockdowns in April 2022, we met at Woodlands, a property south of Mitchell. We were eager to work with some digital media, animation, stop animation and drawing. The collective evolved further with the merging, with the joining of the group with Vanessa Feen and her group, the Wandering Spirits group. Vanessa and I, with the Jude Arts Association, lately have been continuously looking out for grants and opportunities for the group. So just wanted to show these images, showing the joy of being immersed in these places. Understanding the layers and complexity to a place gives more appreciation of a site, in which turn builds on the relationships between the group. Within the camps, we planned structured and informal exchanges. The team sets up conditions in which all these activities can take place, you know, the planning, the preparation, activities, that informal times too, sometimes are the most fruitful. The unplanned collaborations are created while yarning around the campfire, walking, or even sharing meals. Helen will describe an example of this in her section of the presentation. So these next photographs, old photographs of the surveyors. So Helen and I have both shared an interest in human and non-human ecologies and the different methodologies. We visited Kay Nardella at the Museum of Lands Mapping and Surveying, where we borrowed some instruments and which we used either as drawing tools or just to learn about the field work of the surveyor. These images sort of epitomise the way that colonists view and measure the land. And it also shows the tripod and theodolite, which Major Mitchell would have used on his expedition. I mean, you could, the next slide too shows the same thing. You could just spend a whole session talking about just unpacking these images. So the next image is just a circular work I made a while ago, but it just shows using those instruments and using that piece of paper's been soaked many times in different water holes and rivers. And I used a rock sediment that I bought from India, that turquoise colour, an unusual colour for a rock. The next photograph shows a collaboration that Helen and I did. The work, the Steigerfauna nets at the Rights of Nature exhibition in 2018 at the Spring Hill Reservoir. There it is again, but this was in an exhibition, an installation that Helen and I created at Blindside Gallery in Melbourne to highlight our interest in the discourses on land and water access and usage. We called it Chain of Ponds, which was the title that Major Mitchell used himself to describe the frequent water ponds and water holes in Australia in the 19th sort of century. The next slide was a project that I was involved in with the centenary of Canberra in 2015. I met with various community members of Mitchell on the Maranoa River and to talk about the connections with them with the Maranoa while soaking large sheets of paper. So this image is when Robin Archer is in the gallery space, who was director of the larger project on the Murray-Darling Basin. And she just said that in the case of one river, a long string of river communities were drawn through the arts into reflections on their place, their history, present and future. Nothing could be more important for participation in the democratic process than to understand country and to connect as community. So the next slide is just another collaboration that Helen and I did, but the slides are just showing my work in that. but often the work I do is site specific, so that the location and time and material are important as they imply a multi-layered experience of that place. The House Conspiracy residency in 2017 was an experience to collaborate again with Helen, and we installed this work in the Queensland cottage at West End, bringing the subterranean environments into the domestic space. The next slide. I've undertaken several journeys following pathways such as stock routes and ephemeral watersheds in the semi-arid regions of Queensland. This work I made on a waterhole on the Wallam, which was actually on our old property. It hadn't been dry in the 100 years that my husband's family had owned the property. So I went back out and did a lot of rubbings along the waterway. So I'm interested in the way water in all its forms has shaped, mapped and determined locations of the Indigenous and colonised land histories, in that order. So this was a collaborative work of the collective. I'm just showing my section of it in this slide, but this was in Mount Moffat. So each artist took a piece of the Japanese paper and chose either an object or part of the river landscape, and taking a rubbing of that surface or several surfaces using fluorescent materials. So frottage or rubbings allowed the hidden aspects of the watershed to be revealed, while further revelations appeared when we used UV light on it. The paper substrate responds immediately to the terrain, and therefore marks are indexical to that specific site and time. So the technique captures the past, the geological surface, and the present, the drawer connecting their body and thought processes to the ground surface. So it's a method, frottage is a method that allows the drawer to disengage from making the aesthetical distinctions between good and bad, and instead looks at the whole and its interrelationship to other elements. So there's also an element of chance in there, which is makes some interesting, an interesting result. So the next slide shows us all in the art shed at night. Here we are all just experimenting with the UV lights on, and this drawing will be created by the collective. This drawing created by the collective will undergo a further transformation when it's screened at QUT in a couple of weeks' time, which we will tell you about it at the end of this webinar. So the next slide just showing I've used this frottage method again just by transferring embedded text from a solid plaque that is around the Maranoa region onto the paper, which immediately signifies a more fluid narrative as opposed to a fixed view. It's also a way to transfer the history and aura of the object onto the paper surface, you know, capturing a specific moment in that object's history. So these rubbings were done at Drysdale Ponds, which is again south of Mitchell. And while I was there, I actually found an 1866 penny. So I've done a small rubbing on that. And the story in Major Mitchell's journey is that they were looking for water in this area, and the dog that they had with him came back, disappeared, and came back with wet lips, and they realized that the dog had found the water. So the dog took them to where they were camping that night. This is a short video while I'm talking. It was a collaborative work with Vicky Saunders, who curated an exhibition, Babooni, which celebrated shared relationships with the unique countries of the Maranoa region, and to express and reflect, to celebrate one of the key symbols used to represent the Maranoa region. So this is the bottle tree. And that end frame I didn't realise that the tree, it was like it was looking at me. You can see the eye of the tree there. But it just shows that the participants of the collector have ongoing projects that interlink with our Remapping Mitchell Collective. So the next slide is just some stop animation work that I'm working on at the moment. So during COVID, my husband and I took out our caravan to the Maranoa, and we camped on various spots of the Maranoa. I had the opportunity to meet with Vicky, and we visited places marked in Mitchell's journal. He passed through these regions and recorded meticulous details. You know, I felt privileged to be with Vicky during these trips, as she was experiencing the land through the lens of a Gungri woman and researcher, while I was attempting to unlearn some of the visions that Major Mitchell superimposed on the land. At that moment, so I'm working on these series of stop animation drawings, and I let my imagination run in these series, responding to the imagery projected onto the paper that has been created into stop animation. Gunther's chain, which is a tool used by surveyors, eventually becomes a living entity, and the surveyor dives into the water after carefully placing his theodolite into the wooden box. And just last of all, I'll just show you just a 13-second another animation that I've done. If you press play, Michelle, just this happened while Vicky and I were on the site at Mount Redcap, and we were reading excerpts from Major Mitchell, his journal, which I'll quote. There was a curious red cone come miles to the westward, crowned with a bit of rock, on which I longed to plant my theodolite. I immediately set out with a man carrying my theodolite for Mount Redcap. So while Vicky and I were there, we actually saw a red fox appeared before heading off past the cone. And just the last image just acknowledges the different supporters of our project and the artists that have been involved in the recent ones. So thanks for putting up with all the technical difficulties in the beginning. So I hope that was okay.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jude. And my apologies that the tech has been a bit challenging, but that all came through beautifully. That stop animation is just gorgeous, Jude. Well done.
Oh, you got to see the fox?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, good.
And you've got it like a little, almost like, I don't know if it's dust or smoke or just a blur behind him as he moves along. It's just gorgeous. Lovely.
Well, I have to make quite a few, and I'll link them all together once I've made several of them.
Wonderful. Well, shall we turn now to Helen, and then we'll come back obviously to both of you, and we'll have some questions and discussions and talk about your lovely event. I think it's Monday week, isn't it? So, but thank you, Jude. So folks in Zoom land, there's lots of daggy ways to say thank you. You can do an air clap, or you can press a little emoji if you can find them, or just say, thank you, Jude. Thanks so much. And Helen, let's see how our technology goes with your PowerPoint, shall we?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, and how are you today?
Very well, thank you, and hi to everyone. I'm just setting myself up. Yes, hi everyone. So the title of my talk is Things That Go Bump in the Night, and it's the story of a performance video that was made at the last residency at Mount Moffat, which was earlier this year. But first of all, I wish to acknowledge that I live and work on Jagera and Turrbal country, where sovereignty was never ceded. So I pay my respects to the elders and to the generations past, present and future. So in my daily life, I'm inspired by the many non-human residents and visitors to our garden. And they provide me daily bulletins on how to live life well. So that means to pay close attention to the things that matter and don't neglect the essentials, like bathing during lockdown. So firstly, just a little bit about my art practice before I get on to describing the genesis of the artwork that I made at Mount Moffat. So I work spatially and experimentally with a variety of materials, and sometimes I also include human actors or collaborators. Mostly my works don't prescribe a particular narrative, but rather leave space for the viewer to make their own narrative from the scenarios or performances. Next, I'm going to play you a 50-second excerpt from an audio work that I co-produced with an artist called Tiana Jeffries, which was for the 2020 Birds and Language Conference held by Sydney University's School of Literature, Language and Media. So in this work, friends and their children, and indirectly birds, are the performers. So we're working with mimesis and cross-species collaborations to ask the question, how would it feel to be more bird-like? So what our collaborators did was record themselves making bird calls from the scripts that we emailed to them. So those scripts were really, really minimal excerpts from the CSIRO's The Australian Bird Guide, but they weren't given the name of the bird. So all they would get is just a tiny little script, for example, the one up on the screen there, which is 4 o'clock, chop, chop, Jacob, Jacob. So here's just about a 50-second excerpt of how that sounded.
Noisy friar bird, loud and variable, harsh cackling and rolling sounds, including bill clapping. Pairs call in duet. Common calls reminiscent of 4 o'clock, chock chock, and Jacob Jacob.
4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob. 4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob.
4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob. 4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob.
4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob. 4 o'clock, chock chock, Jacob Jacob.
Pairs call in duet, duet, duet.
So enough of that. As you can hear, the children particularly were extremely enthusiastic birds. So over the past 7 or more years of the residencies, I've definitely been truly welcomed onto Goongaree country several times. And these lasting impressions continue into daily life and inform ongoing conversations, inquiries and research, and art projects with Jude. So the hazy image that you can see on the left is a recent Instagram post by the artist Carla Pringle. And she says of it, I quote, "The shape of things I cannot see, full spectrum pinhole images, light, water, wind, darkness, and the bending of things," end of quote. So the viewer strains to make out any tangible object or detail here, and the metaphor of a pinhole view becomes that of a tiny perspective within multitudinous viewpoints. This idea leads us into the considerations that I carry into my making my artworks. There's 3 of those. So the first one is bypassing what Monica Gagliano calls the household of the mind, which is a lovely expression, I think. So what she's talking about, she's an academic author and researcher, by the way, attending to what is not visible or audible, but nonetheless might be felt or intuited. So my second guiding idea is expressed by Donna Haraway as the ecological as a multiple of entanglements in the thick present. So the idea of the thick present allows time as non-linear, in which all times exist simultaneously. And on the Maranoa, as elsewhere in this land called Australia, the thick present definitely holds multiple stories. And sometimes these stories and histories are held in uncomfortable and even contested proximity with each other. My third consideration is actually about levity, absurdity, and playfulness. That's because humour can cut through rhetoric to deliver a concise but sophisticated understanding of complex matters such as global ecological distress. And it also provides us with moments of emotional release. This example is from Twitter during lockdown, and this got a lot of circulation along with a lot of other people's contributing their meme on it. It says, the businessmen are finally returning to the wild. The earth is healing. We're the virus. Sorry about the quality of the image, but that's the best I could do. And you can see in it that it's nighttime, and you can see the men in suits with briefcases heading into a field. And they've been caught in a vehicle headlight, or maybe it's nature lovers out spotlighting for wildlife. So I love this work because you could actually write, and people have written academic papers about all the ideas in that commentary. So that's an example of what Timothy Morton would talk about when he says how to panic cheerfully while not looking away from what might be a very complex situation. So finally, for my talk, I'll just step you through how the video work titled Things That Go Bump in the Night came about. It was set in the grounds of Warong, which is a working cattle station, and the homestay for the recent residency we had at Mount Moffat. So I'm drawing on Thomas Mitchell's diaries as colonial frontier accounts of the Maranoa. And at times Mitchell tends to wax quite poetic about his experiences. So I seized one moment when he's delighted with his horse. And he says, you can see that little poem there, a steed of matchless speed, and so on. So had that in mind. And the other kind of research I did was to go along with Jude and visit the wonderful Kay Nardella at the Museum of Lands Mapping and Surveying, having a look at the gear there and the way colonisers measured, mapped and claimed land. Then I thought up some characters, and I was aware that Jude was going to be working with fluorescence and UV lighting, so I made some costumes just from everyday and repurposed materials, and I used fluorescent paints so that we could use the UV lighting at night, and planned a nocturnal performance, which made me think about, well, you know, visions of awkward phantoms flitting through a darkened landscape. And then while we were at the homestay, the whole thing sort of came together quite quickly. So we had the characters, we had the site of the homestay, and that was really quite serendipitous. So there was this really weird equipment sitting near a great big tree. And one part of it was this ancient exercise bike that was up on a platform. So it was like, well, I went out there to exercise so they'd have a really great view and they wouldn't get bored. And then a little bit further down there was a red wheel on a post. So the homestay owner turned up and explained it was used to train horses how to camp draft cattle. So that's camp drafting is where a horse and rider focus on one beast and cut it out of the herd or run down a breakaway beast. So what was missing from that equipment was a wire loop that used to run between the bike wheel and the freestanding red wheel. And when you pedaled the bike, it pulled a wire around the wheels to which there was attached a flag or a rag, and the horse was trained to sort of lock onto following that. So once we had all that info, we all kind of just figured it out spontaneously. And our characters had a storyline. So it was getting dark, it was good. We wanted a nighttime performance. People made suggestions, got into the costumes, brought in the power, wrangled the gear. Moretta climbed up on the horse and pedaled like crazy, was clanking and clanking, and we horsed around, waved the flag, recorded and encouraged from the sidelines. And with a little bit of time warping, Thomas Mitchell and his frisky steed, plus a phantom cyclist and a flag, activate the night. So I just give you a sample of how that happened. It was freezing cold by then. Moretta was cycling away, but she was sort of also quietly saying, "I'm freezing, can you hurry?" And that's Vanessa holding the flag, Stuart, aka Mitchell, aka Horse, aka Explorer. Yeah, so watching all that happen nearby was this amazing tree. So we recorded its sonic presence the next day after the performance by horse prancing around its perimeter through a thick carpet of shed bark leaves and branches. You could hear that crunchy sound probably in the soundtrack. So that work is nearly finished, but we've had a message from Thomas Mitchell, and he's promised to come out of his disembodied state for us to record his horse poem for the final mix. So that will go eventually into the soundtrack as well once he's done that recording for us. So from that, other works are in progress, such as a series of portraits you can see here, probably an animation and some sculptures. Yeah, so that's how a work might arise from it's a good example of how it arises from our collective's activities and how it produces ongoing conversations, cycles of conversations, making and ideas. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Helen. You guys look like you were having so much fun.
Yep.
So look, I should have said, if folks have any particular questions for our lovely speakers, please pop them in the chat to start with so that we can sift through any of them. We've got about 12 minutes until we finish up for today. I wonder, Helen and Jude, could you share with folks when you both started out at Maranoa and how many trips you've had out there since then, and how many folks you think have been involved? Because I know my daughter and I were lucky enough. Were we at the very first one, or was that the second one?
Officially, the collective, we say, began in 2018 at the project that you were at, Michelle. You and
fantastic. Yeah.
Before that, different smaller groups of artists have come out, and we've got together with different local people just on a much smaller scale, probably nothing as planned. And maybe that One River project in 2015 that I did, that's when I also, networked with a lot of local people. So, I don't, all up might have been about 8 times we've had different groups come out.
Fantastic. I know from my first trip, it was just magical because we were right there on the river, and the artworks that people were creating, they really were in dialogue with nature, crouched down near waterholes. That was the first time I ever heard the acoustic recordings of the little creatures in the creek making their little clickety noises. And I was just charmed, absolutely mesmerized. So what's next for your groups, guys? Are you going to go out again next year?
Well, we hope to. We have plans on another couple of sites that Major Mitchell had been to and significant to the Gungari people. So, but we do have 2 local exhibitions, one in Mitchell and one in Injune coming up November, and then again in March for Injune. So it's step by step. We're creating this work, and hopefully it will travel to regional galleries perhaps in the future, or to a larger gallery space.
Fantastic. And Helen, what have been some of the highlights of the past trips for you, in addition to having a horse trotting around in the evening, luminous and wonderful?
I think it's being on Gungari country with Gungari folk provides an experience that, you know, as a city dweller, just doesn't really happen. So to make connections like that, to spend time there, they share their knowledge, their experiences, and it's a great privilege, really. Yeah, so you know what it's, I mean, everyone knows what it's like to visit a place as a tourist and how one's experience of it is so superficial. And often, you know, you just don't get to know or hear the real stories of a place. So this has been a truly unique experience and one that I value very highly. And I am amazed really by the ideas that are really, I feel there's a real diversity and richness in the ideas and the kinds of artworks that are coming out of this now. So it takes a while really to build those layers of experience and connection. Yeah, yeah.
And can I ask you both, I mean, it is quite a remarkable opportunity to be on a place, to be talking about the so-called first explorers with the first peoples, and to be exploring some of those discussions and issues together. Have there been kind of revelations for people? Do you find non-Indigenous people comment on how it gives them a different view of their own colonial past, or what has that provoked in people?
Definitely I have. I felt that happening to myself, and I know that really the education that is, you know, provided in that way through connecting personally is unique. Yeah, yeah. So particularly Indigenous artists, I feel have taught me so much about Indigenous experiences, and you know, all those stories of colonial times, and now continuing to now. We're still a colonized country, and we need to hear them. Yeah, we need to hear them. So yeah, it's a very special collective, I think, that's happening here.
And you, Jude, do you have any thoughts on that exploration of Mitchell and his adventures while being with the First Peoples, who I often look at and just think they must have often been in their estates watching these strange people go past on horses, and the strange white people were hungry and thirsty and lost, and for them it was just their backyard. I mean, that's a gentle, you know, reflection on the colonial process, of course, but just so bizarre. What have been your experience of conversation, Jude, with folks during these?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even just the fact of being there on those sites, you know, you're reading out these excerpts from the journal, you were there, you can see what Major Mitchell saw, but then you're getting this, as Helen was talking about, that learning and knowledge of Gungari people, which, you know, I'd lived there for 21 years, and it's a slow process, and it's a slow process too of relationships, to gradually get to know and learn different knowledge, and so that's why I think the collective it works, because it's decades really of this relationships developing. So yeah, no, it's been a unique, very unique experience.
No, well, I can't commend you enough. I think the artworks and the practice that I saw on my first trip, that I've seen come out of your works, all of the folks involved, are remarkable. But then to layer that on top of these really beautiful interpersonal relationships that grow and return and revisit and are questioning, you know, the very history of our own continent. I mean, there's a lot of layers to these remarkable projects. I've got a comment. Barbara, hello, Barbara. I think Barbara would be in the Blue Mountains today. She's written, I love this emphasis of mimesis and unlearning colonial visions of country, and the idea of bypassing the household of the mind, that our ordinary assumed ways, that of our ordinary assumed ways of thinking and acting. And there's lots of other lovely comments, people saying thank you for sharing, wonderful talk, gorgeous animations, and I wrote gorgeous horse somewhere in there. Before we wrap up, a question I always love to ask people, because as you all know, I am deeply inspired by nature just for everything that I get up to since I was very little. But what brought you to look at nature as the inspiration for your art? Can you both perhaps share a 2-minute story of anything that brought you into a place where you realized that nature was the great inspiration for your work? Helen's nodding. I'll let her go first, perhaps.
I reckon it was a completely natural thing when I was a kid. I grew up on a bayside suburb in Melbourne, and it was fast becoming, as you know, a built-up suburb. But when I was a little kid, a lot of it was still the coastal heathland. And I mean, not that I'd seen anywhere else. I just thought I lived on the most beautiful place in the whole earth. I just loved it. And yeah, it was a playground, and our pets, I play with our pets. I'm an animal tragic, and I want every little creature and critter I come across, I want to say hello to them. I want to, connect with them. Like the other day, I was looking up through a screen of leaves, lily-pilly leaves, and on the other side of the screen was a currawong had come in, because we have that bird bath, and currawongs are sort of a bit circumspect, they'll be careful, and they've got used to us being there, but they're not that great at being seen, like crows hate to be seen. Anyway, I was peering through, and we were actually playing eye contact through the screen of leaves. So there'd be a gap, and I put my eyeball, like we were a couple of meters apart, but I would meet with his little, or their little eye, and we would have it's a communication, like we're saying something to each other. That's what inspires me. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks, Helen. And Jude, I know it's a flippant amount of time to share the story of your life and work, but any particular moments that made you go, this is what I want to look at and draw? And
yeah, sure. And look, I think what Helen's saying too, when you're in areas which incidentally, Harry and I have been traveling in our caravan a lot the last 5 years, and so we have camped in a lot of very interesting sites across Australia. But when you see say animals interacting, or you see a plant for the very first time, you've never experienced that, or you see any of those things, like I was saying too about the turtle and the echidna on the river, they are such special moments. You just don't forget that, and you value those environments more and more. And I think as you get older, you appreciate them, because also being 62 years old, I guess I've had 62 years of memory of what maybe the areas, what used to be there and what is now, and being very aware of that and the changes that are taking place.
Yeah, I think that's inescapable, isn't it? Look, we're coming up to the end of our time, but Jude, would you like to give a lovely promotional plug for your event on Monday week? I think it's Monday week.
That's right. Yes. Helen, do you have the name of it in front of you?
Yes, I do. Yes, exactly. I wrote it down because it is quite long.
Yeah, it is a longer. It's
okay. So
yeah, you say it, Helen. You do it.
This is a symposium, an all-day symposium on the 21st of August, and it's titled "The More Than Human Maker Symposium 2023, Yimbaya Maranoa, Creating Resonant Echoes from Country." So that's one of the events as part of the QUT Sustainability Week. So that's from the 21st to 25th of August. How's that, Jude? Did I say it right?
You did. And you know what? I just looked it up and I've popped it in the chat. I'm assuming, and I'm sorry if I've got this wrong, it is a public event, so folks can register and come along, can't they?
Yeah,
yes,
very much.
Yeah. Well, what I might do is I'll make sure that event is on the AELA Earth Arts website. and we'll do a little promo for it when we send out other materials to our mailing list this week. But I've just put it in the chat, Monday the 21st, QUT's More Than Human Maker Symposium. There are a couple of us will be there from the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. Really delighted to have been invited to come and talk, and really can't thank you enough, lovely ladies. I know that sitting on Zoom isn't a natural condition for those of you who are out and about exploring rivers and creatures and soil, but it's just such a lovely way to share your practice and your inspiration. And I know I certainly feel a whole lot better having listened to that and going on that journey with you via the trickiness of Zoom. But yes, there's some lovely comments in there. Thank you. It's been wonderful and insightful. I understand your work a bit more now. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for discussing your own art projects. You've all been very inspiring. I think that's a nice note to end on. But can I urge you all to look up that little event. It's going to be fun. And if you're not already, please connect with the Australian Earth Arts mailing list. Actually, I think the main AELA mailing list, which you can find on our websites. But yeah, it's been lovely having you, lovely hosting you. Thanks again for your patience with the technology. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the real on a Monday week. So thank you, Jude, and thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.